Well, Canada has some of the most liberal euthanasia laws in the world, but they're about to legalise euthanasia for drug addicts. In March, they will pass legislation that means people with substance abuse issues can access government assisted suicide, even though they have no physical ailments whatsoever. Now, euthanasia was legalised in Canada in 2016. In 2021, it was 3% of all deaths in Canada were at the hands of the government. 10,000 people assisted to kill themselves. This is a terrible idea now to allow euthanasia for drug addicts. You'd hardly suggest that people with substance abuse issues are in the best place to make decisions like this about their lives or to end their lives. And not only that, but most people with substance abuse issues can be helped to live a meaningful life if they just get government support. Of course, it's a lot cheaper to help people just end their lives than to provide that support, which is exactly the point Canadian Conservative MP Ed Fast made.
Today, this House will vote on whether to protect the mentally ill against assisted suicide. But yesterday, the Justice Minister falsely claimed that euthanizing vulnerable Canadians was good public policy and the only way to comply with Canadian law. Meanwhile, we're hearing more and more reports of Canadians crying out for help and being offered assisted suicide instead. Is this the sorry state of our mental health system?
Liz, it's kind of a dystopian world, isn't it, where it becomes more economical for a government to suggest that maybe people want to just end their lives than to supply services to help them improve their lives.
Well, I think our government here is no less guilty of the same thing. We see euthanasia now passed in nearly every state in the country. And the restrictions around that are always cried about as soon as the legislation is inked. This has got to be more liberal, because once you legitimise the idea that death is an answer to pain, then who are you to say what kind of pain? Be it physical, be it emotional, be it mental. Who are you to say how much pain someone needs to be in before you will do what we are told is the compassionate thing to do, that you'll give them a dignified death, as they love to use all this kind of wording around it, like it's not literally assisted suicide. That is what you are doing. And regardless of what that person is suffering from, at the end of the day, it is an extremely vulnerable person who needs help and is not in a good way. There's countries in Europe that have extremely, extremely liberal euthanasia laws, because they recognise what this guy just pointed out. It's far cheaper for us to say, hey, look, if you want to take your life, who are we to say no? And sure, go for it. But I think we're going to continue to see that in our own country as the slippery slope, which everyone says is BS, but keeps proving itself to be legitimate in every other jurisdiction that has had euthanasia laws in place for far longer.
What's astonishing to me about Canada, Joe, is that it's only 7 years ago that they introduced euthanasia at all. And when it's introduced, it's with these really tough things. It's got to be someone who's, facing certain death within the next 12 months. There's got to be all these checks and balances. 7 years later, which is the blink of an eye, if you've got a drug addiction, and you want to end your life, that's fine. We'll help you with that. And if you're a bit mentally depressed, that'll be the next thing. And then after that, it'll be for children, because how could you be compassionate for adults but not show that same compassion to children? And pretty soon you think, how did we end up here? Well, gradually and then suddenly.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like, how did you lose your money very slowly then all at once? I'm really worried about this. I agree. And again, Canada is just Australia with snow. I mean, we're so similar in terms of our outlook, our parliamentary systems, our social institutions. And so it's a pretty good template for what could happen here. I honestly couldn't believe it when I read this story. I have serious misgivings about euthanasia. Strangely enough, I think I'm with you, Liz, but I don't mind it happening. But what I don't like is it being sanctioned by the state. Already, there are plenty of wink, wink, nudge, nudge agreements.
Oh, 100%.
Palliative care physicians,
Everyone knows
family members.
what
Everyone knows.
will make him comfortable.
That's right.
Means.
So that's
Everyone
right.
knows
make
what
him
that
comfortable.
means.
And I like it sort of staying that way because, again, once you open the door a crack to death as an option, as a valid option, I think it actually screws up part of what it means to be human. I think there are obviously people who are very, very unhappy and who do want to take their lives, even without any medical ailments. But I think for the most part, your default position as a human being is we have to try to stay alive at all costs, but more importantly, we have to keep everyone in the group alive at all costs as much as we possibly can, because the minute you start saying, well, maybe you'd be better off, Grandma, you know, you are in a lot of pain. I mean, in nomadic societies, they did just leave people behind to die because no one could slow them down. But we now have the capacity to keep people alive. And years ago when I was working in the state, a political gallery, one stat, they were really worried about ballooning health costs, and it was projected that just the health budget alone would soon be bigger than the total budget for the state of New South Wales.
This is what I'm talking about.
90%, I believe, of that money is spent in the last 10 years of a person's life.
Yep.
Now, if you're a bean counter and you're looking at, you know, okay, well, there's a lot of people over 90 who are getting a lot of...
There was an instance in Canada, and it was brought before a parliamentary inquiry, where a veteran said that he'd called the Department of Veterans Affairs, or its equivalent in Canada, looking for support, and the person on the other end of the line, the public servant, actually said to him, have you considered MAID, medically assisted dying, as an option? And so he didn't bring it up. The government person actually suggested it to him as an option, and that's one of the big problems. It destroys trust in institutions,
and also, how many
with
old
doctors,
people do you know who say,
family?
I don't want to be a burden, I don't worry about me, dear. And so suddenly they're feeling guilty for being alive.
Because they know they have that option. They now live in a society that's like, well, you know, we don't mind. If you want to, we're fine with it.